right, is everyone caffeinated up? Are you guys excited to be here? Yes? Awesome. So we've had several really great presentations over the course of this week, right? And this is something that I'm super passionate about. My name is Del Nakai again. I lead our customer and revenue enablement. If you're wondering what MariaDB is, it's a database company. That's what the DB stands for. This in particular, I would go so far as to say if you don't have change management built into your enablement strategy, that your strategy is actually incomplete. So I want you to really think about that, because ultimately, what are we trying to do? We're trying to work with our executives, our stakeholders, to help them realize the business vision, the strategic vision that they have. And there's a lot of pressure on us to do that, right? It's an exciting opportunity, but there's also a lot of pressure that goes with it. And we just want to be mindful of that. So I'm going to be covering why. Why should you care about this? Also, what's an example of a methodology you can consider? And how can you actually go about implementing it? So that's going to be the focus today. Before I do, I'm going to share a lesson learned. And by the way, I don't know about you guys, but every time I see the words under pressure, Bowie and Queen are playing in my head. Anyone else? Yes. Awesome. Cool. We're in good company. So I want you to picture a conference room with a U-shaped table. I'm sitting right here in the upper part of the U, and then I have my CRO, our CEO, and our COO right there in the room with all of our most senior sales leaders in the room as well. This was our QBR. I was at my previous company about 6 months in, and we were talking about the year ahead. It was our last QBR for the year, and we were talking about, okay, so what is it we're trying to accomplish? What is important for us for next year for the objectives that we have? We went with OKR's objectives and key results. So we were talking, and I kid you not, every single conversation we had ended in all roads lead to Dell. And it's not just Dell, it's Dell and the team, so our enablement function, which is really exciting, right? They're acknowledging the fact that with their business strategy, we can really have an impact and help facilitate that change and make sure that we're moving in the direction that they are seeking. So this was really exciting. I actually presented an executive overview of our onboarding program and the changes we wanted to make to it. They were totally into it, really excited by that as well. And soon after the QBR, our CRO comes up to me and says, okay, we're super excited about your plan for onboarding and we need it done by January. So that was just 3 months away, and we had not 1, but 2 weeks of onboarding boot camps. So needless to say, it was not a little bit of work. It was a lot of work for the team. We were about a team of 7 or 8 at the time. And it was really hard for me to say no to that, because ultimately, onboarding is really foundational, right? We all have to have an onboarding program. We all knew as a team where we needed to get our program as well. So we wanted to make sure that it was successful, and I said yes. It was not my finest moment as a leader, I will say that. The team was not super stoked on the idea, but we had to move it forward, and it was really important. But the challenge is not just the fact that the team struggled with it, but, and you guys know this, it just takes one detractor, one sales leader saying, hey, that's not quite what we're looking for. And we got a few of those with the onboarding program. And I didn't facilitate the change in a way that communicated, hey, enablement is all about iteration. We're not going to be perfect every single time out. We have a short period of time for a lot of content to change. So just managing that would have made all the difference in the world. So that was my lesson learned. I hope you learned from my mistake and not repeat it. So let's talk a little bit higher level in terms of the why. So I don't know if you guys have heard of a gentleman by the name of John Kotter. He's basically like the grandfather of change. This is a statistic from his studies. He's a Harvard Business School professor. And it's basically 70% of initiatives fail because they have no change management in place, or it's not followed through with effectively. 70%. That's crazy, right? That's a lot of our work that we're putting into it. And we just talked, in fact, this session before, I'm like, you guys are laying me up perfectly, thank you. We were talking about all these different things, reinforcement, all of that is really, really key. So this is actually something you can take back to your executives and say, here's why implementing a change management methodology is important. The other is around employee retention, right? So we want to make sure that we're retaining our employees. We've all heard about the Great Resignation. Sales in general is very competitive, especially right now. So the last thing we want to do is really leave people with this feeling of dread of like, no one cares about me, no one's considering my experience, my feelings, any of that. We're just revolving door of change constantly, and it's not sticking, and it's really frustrating. So we want to try to limit that. And change management is actually a way that we can influence. It influences culture as much as it influences our ability to retain our go-to-market employees. So that's another reason why it's really important, because at the end of the day, change is about people and humans and human behavior. So we can't just say, okay, jump up and down, do this, do that, and everyone jumps in and does it. I was gonna do something just to mess with you guys and ask you guys to switch seats with the person next to you. And just think about that for a second. Like, you have all your stuff, you have your drinks, you have your bags, and just that one tiny little move is uncomfortable, right? So some of the changes we're asking, especially for our most senior people, they've been doing it that way for years. So it takes a lot for them to change. And the third factor is really around us and our practice as enablement practitioners. So this image will haunt my nightmares. I'm afraid to look back because it's like 40x what I normally have looked at. But land of broken things. I think we've all heard about it. I want you guys to repeat after me. I will not own, come on, I will not own the land of broken things. Amen. So what does this mean exactly? We've talked about being reactive versus proactive, and that's ultimately what it comes down to, right? So we get a lot of hand raisers. Hey, I need X, Y, and Z. I need it by yesterday, and this is really important. My reps need this. My BDRs need this. And all that can be true, but it is really important for us to be able to say no, or not now, or let's think about this. Let's be methodical about how we roll this out. And this is no different. So for you to serve as a strategic business function, you cannot say yes to every single thing that comes your way. We talked a little bit about this earlier as well. Tie it to the company KPIs, tie it to the charter you've established. If it doesn't meet some of those, talk about it. I would say never say no, absolutely not. You want to be open. You want them to see that you're there to help, right? But it's important for us and our functions and what we're trying to accomplish and the direction we're trying to take enablement for us to be able to say no, or at least help our leaders be thoughtful about how they're actually implementing change. So those are a little bit about the whys. How can you do this? So for me, I've actually adopted ADKAR as a methodology. It's by ProSci. I'm not a paid sponsor for them. I just found it to be very, very intuitive. So my team was already kind of thinking in these terms, and when I came across this, I was like, this is perfect. I got certified in it, really understood it, and it's really, really key. So I'm going to walk you through what exactly it means. You ultimately have to find one that works for you if this is something you want to pursue. So awareness, what is that all about? Simon Sinek, start with why. No different for any change initiative, especially larger ones. It's important for us to be mindful of our leaders communicating through the ranks. What exactly is the reason for the change? What is this business strategy initiative meant to serve? Why now? All of those things are really important. One of the things that I do with my leaders is like a waterfall approach, and I didn't make that term up, but I stole it from someone as well. So it's basically you start with your executive sponsor, you have them share the initial message, and then it trickles down to the next line of leaders and so on, all the way through the frontline managers, because that's really important. The other thing here, going back to change is challenging, we have to be able to address fears and concerns. So we want to make sure that we're not just overlooking that. It's important to have those open conversations. What are you concerned about? You're concerned about how is this going to impact your workflow, potentially how it's going to impact your take home. What is it that you're concerned about? Talking through that is important, and the leader is essential, especially the frontline leader, because ultimately, what we're trying to do is build in and establish a desire for that change to actually happen. I want this. This is going to be beneficial for me. Maybe they're not super gung-ho, shouting from the rooftops, I'm going to make this change, this is amazing. But they understand the benefit to them, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. What's in it for me? What's in it for that person? Helping them answer that question as a frontline leader is a really important part of their responsibility with any change initiative. Knowledge. This is actually where most of us start. because that's where people say, okay, we need this training, we need this thing. We jump into the knowledge portion, that initial enablement. It's great, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. And if we jump into that without building that desire and awareness, you get pushback, you don't really get proper adoption, and ultimately we are responsible for that. Whether it's a tool or methodology or whatever that change is, we are responsible for facilitating that change through our leaders. And then the other piece, of course, is when you initially have that knowledge, you're not necessarily perfect at it. You're still developing that ability, that skill. So coaching becomes really, really essential. And essentially, having your managers be able to build up that skill with their leaders is really, really key, right? So that's a critical component, as well as reinforcement. That's the fifth component of ADKAR. There's a couple things here. So obviously, additional enablement always helps. Making sure that the leaders are actually thinking through how do they integrate this into their weekly meetings, into their one-on-ones, how do they actually reinforce this on their end as well as us. And the other piece of this that's really, really important, I think I heard it mentioned in the previous session, is around celebrating successes. So we want to make sure that we are acknowledging what's actually working. And I don't know about you guys, but peer learning is awesome because a rep is much more likely to listen to a peer who is successful in implementing something than they are to me, their leader, even the CRO. So it's important for us to share that message and be vocal about it. So those are just a few of the components. There's more to consider. That methodology is helpful. I'll let you read through this list, and I'm going to highlight a couple of things. So one is, don't assume that just because someone comes to you for enablement support, that means training. Sometimes it's a process issue, and you can work with sales ops to figure out, okay, what is the challenge that we're having here? How do we help solve this problem for the company? And it doesn't necessarily involve us training anyone on anything. Maybe that's the follow-up to fixing that process issue. What I really want to focus on here, though, is a coaching culture and framework. So there will never be a similar scale of us to the customers that we serve as their frontline manager to those direct reports. It's just not scalable. There's no point to it. And it's important for our leaders to understand the buck does not stop with enablement, it stops with them. They are responsible, they are a part of the process, they own responsibilities within any kind of change initiative. So really helping them understand their role as well as giving them a framework. This is really, really key. So I don't know about you guys, but when I became a leader, I didn't get a handbook. Nobody told me exactly what to do, right? And fun statistic for you guys. So this is by a Gallup study. And they said the average age of a first-time manager is 30. The average age the first time they go through leadership training is 40. That explains a lot of the bad bosses we've had in the background, right? I've struggled myself. I've not been a perfect leader because, again, it doesn't come with a handbook. And here's the key. With sales coaching in particular, it's really important to give them some tools to be successful here. When we're giving constructive feedback, people naturally have that lizard brain, the fight or flight response gets instigated, and we want people to be open, receptive to receiving that coaching. So we don't want to just jump into something, and what I've seen, I don't know about you guys, but what I've seen is sales managers, often former sellers, they did really well. They know how they were successful. They want to impart that wisdom onto their team and say, hey, here's what I did. Here's what you should do as well. That doesn't always work. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. And in addition to that, all well-meaning, they load up on 10 different things that this poor person should start working on right away. That's not tenable. Maybe one or two things at any given time. So with the leadership training I went through at my last company, I actually developed a 5-step coaching model. I'm happy to share details if you want to reach out to me afterwards. It's just really, really straightforward. The first step is letting the other person talk and share their perspective on what worked, what didn't work, how would I change this, how would I do it differently. As adults, we often know where we could do better. And giving them that opportunity just keeps the dialogue a little bit more open as opposed to straight into, here's what you could do better. So I think that's really key. I'll touch on some of the other components in a bit as well. So when I was preparing for this, I was thinking through, okay, maybe you've heard about change management, maybe you even have a change management department, or you're thinking about incorporating it, but what is the one key takeaway I want you guys to have walking out of this session? And that is this: don't keep this to yourself, to your team. If you only implement change management within your team, if you adopt a framework, it's not going to be successful without you institutionalizing it within your company. And what I mean by that is I actually went through a session with our sales leaders to start on what the methodology is all about, and I spoke their language. I started with, what are we trying to accomplish? What are some of your goals? What is that going to take for us to actually get there? And they started understanding, okay, this makes sense. And what I want to also do with them is have them speak my language. So I'm reinforcing the different steps in the change process as we're going through them. I even tied it back to a recent initiative that we had just launched and said, okay, here's where we've gone through, here's where we are now, here's the next step. Just using that framework for us all to have that common language was really helpful. The other piece here that I think is also really valuable is working with your HR team to also further institutionalize this. So we've gone through 2 acquisitions so far. Hopefully it'll continue. We'll continue to build and grow. And something as major as that, you really want to be mindful about how you implement change. You're bringing in new people into your company. It doesn't always have to be a huge, grand change, but it's important for us to also speak that language with our HR team. Now, I've introduced them to the idea of it. I haven't fully talked into or them into considering it and adopting it, but they were open to it when I first brought it up. It's like, yes, it would be nice for us to do that. Obviously, we also want to change our methodology and how deep we go into this depending on the depth of the actual initiative. So if it's a really meaty one, we want to follow all those stages. But if it's a smaller change, then maybe it's the awareness plus a little bit of knowledge plus then having managers reinforce it. So you can play around with that. The one caveat to all of this is, if you do this, if you follow through and actually implement a change methodology that works for you, that really helps you be successful, your company be successful, don't be alarmed or frustrated if you can't always follow it. It's just not possible. This happened to me recently. So we're going to be focusing on a key product next year. Our next fiscal year starts in October. And our CEO really wanted everyone in the sales organization to be certified on this product. It's a complex product, it's fairly new in the industry, and we want to make sure we're positioning it and explaining it effectively. Now, I talked to my CRO, I said, hey, this will be great for next quarter, let's focus on that. He was on board with it. He talked to our CEO and came back to me and said, actually, we got to move this forward now, right? Not at all in the way that I would implement this certification program, right? It's really frustrating. There have been some questions around it, some concerns around it, so not managed as well as it could be. But when you have this established with your company, that you have this change management approach, you can go back to it and say, okay, we're going to start with this. This is the first step in the process. Know that this is not sufficient for us to actually see the results you're looking for. We're going to need reinforcement. We're going to need coaching around this. We need further enablement, frankly, because we're not really enabling. We're just handing over videos and asking people to take a test and get certified. So I think it's important to not be disheartened when that happens, because it will happen. It's just having tools to be able to then communicate around what is the next step here, right? The other thing I did as part of rolling out this methodology internally is I talked to my leaders about their responsibilities, and I defined exactly and had a list under each of these categories of all the things that they need to be doing. So champion, fairly straightforward, building awareness, sharing the why, addressing fears and concerns, making sure that they can also be the voice of their team. So if their team is concerned about something, they hadn't thought about it, they can take it back to leadership and talk through it and bring back the reasons why, right? So they can address that piece of it. Coaching, of course, we've touched on already, really, really important, because you all know this, training is only a single point in time. That is not sufficient for people to learn, adopt, adapt, change their behavior. So coaching becomes so, so critical. And with management, It sounds like straightforward. You're their manager, hold them accountable to things, but it's not always something that is thought through. It's not easy to give constructive feedback, hold people accountable. That's one of the hardest parts of our jobs as leaders, right? So helping them to understand, share what success looks like, share your expectations with them, work with them, coach them, and help them improve, and also hold them accountable to it. This is really key. Otherwise, everyone can just do their own thing, right? And there's no point to having an enablement team. So I really defined for the leaders what our expectations are of them and what they need to be doing. It doesn't mean you just hand it over to them and say, hey, okay, you got this, right? Peace out, I'm done. The other part of AdCard that I really appreciated learning about was building a communication plan. So essentially, in addition to the waterfall approach of having the whys go out, it's just ongoing throughout any kind of change initiative for you to be able to build out a communication plan and path. And I've gone as far as writing out either bullet points or paragraphs and then saying, hey, CRO, put this in your own words. As the executive sponsor, we want this message to start with you. So that's really, really helpful, and don't forget to tie it back to the successes. So you do want to communicate around what successes we're hearing about and celebrate that and really acknowledge it as well and build that into your communication plan. The other thing around the executive sponsor, so based on AdCard's methodology, they say the presence and involvement of your executive sponsor is the #1 factor that impacts your ability to effectively manage change, which is pretty significant, right? We all know that our reps are much more likely to listen to the CRO. And at the same time, we know that the CRO is really, really busy, so we can't necessarily pull them into every single meeting that we have on a particular topic. And frankly, this is something I'm still trying to figure out. How do I get them involved? How do I get people hearing from this person directly? Continuing to reinforce the whys, continuing to reinforce the value of this change to the company, to them as well, what's in it for them. So I think that's really important for us to consider. And collaboration, so with the change with onboarding that I mentioned at my previous company, that was the one piece that I knew was going to be missing from it. That was so frustrating for me because I really wanted to make sure I involved the stakeholders. And you probably all know this already, but when you have those really loud people, the ones that are the detractors, or they're just very opinionated, or they're the subject matter expert, they're going to be the first to raise their hand and say, oh, there's something wrong with this. So what you can do is bring them into the process. This was mentioned in the session before, involvement in the program development or the review process, but get their buy-in along the way. It's not enough to just have it at the first stage where you're doing the executive summary, everyone's gung-ho about it, but then it kind of falls through. So involve them as much as you can, really collaborate and support your leaders in that respect. This was also mentioned as well, I think, I forget your name, but you mentioned as a coaching or sales manager toolkit. So this is similar to that, a coaching guide. So think about having to implement sales methodology. And then with this guide, you have, let's say, a 12-week program for your managers to know exactly what to do. So in your first 4 weeks, we're going to be focusing on X, Y, and Z. Here's what to bring into your team meetings. Here's what to talk about in your one-on-ones. So really valuable to guide them through this process because, again, we have a status quo bias. We get comfortable, we get complacent. It's not because we don't want to do well or do well for our companies. It's just you get back to your norm. And so many managers are spending so much time in sales meetings as opposed to really managing their team and coaching their team that this can kind of fall by the wayside unless we bring attention to it. So there's a lot of value in being able to provide something to them to take back after all this has been rolled out for them to have some sort of guide to refer back to. So highly recommend that. So summary, institutionalized methodology, really key. Don't allow it to just sit with you and your team because that's not going to be sufficient for everyone to speak that language, understand the importance of each of those stages in the change process, and make sure that you are involving as much as you can your HR team as well. So identifying KPIs, I didn't directly mention this, but it's been mentioned in different sessions. So before you start anything, any kind of initiative, make sure you're aligning on what success looks like. How are we defining success? What is that KPI that we're going to be looking at to see whether or not anything has actually been accomplished, because otherwise the alternative is people just say, okay, how do we know this has been successful, or what have you done to make sure this has been successful? So this piece is really key. Building a coaching culture, I cannot emphasize that enough. It's so, so important for managers to understand what their role is. And also, if there's not a culture existing that's focused on coaching, then that's something that you really need to help develop in your organizations. And one of the ways to support that is having some sort of coaching methodology, framework, enablement that you can really make sure that you're dispersing across the board with your leaders. The other thing that I found to be really helpful is implementing in phases. So that's something I've started to do more and more. I mentioned enablement is all about iteration, but it's also helpful to break things apart, right? So if it seems like an overwhelming amount of change in a short period of time, say, all right, great, this is important. Here's what we're going to do in phase one. Really define the scope and set expectations with your stakeholders. And then you're able to just continue to build on that. And it's easier for people to actually adopt that change when it's kind of rolled out in phases. And obviously, also piloting is great. Whenever you can manage it, being able to work out the kinks of any program with a few people is much less painful than trying to do that with like 100 people that you're rolling something out to. So I would say definitely try to pilot any programs whenever possible. The one thing I'll go back to is in terms of lessons learned. So with my current company, I started as a mighty team of one. And basically, one of the first things I had to do is establish an onboarding program. There was none in existence. Some of our sales leaders had gathered some information, tried their best. Wasn't quite an onboarding program. So not only did I share the executive summary, I also involved them in the content development process and the review process, all the way up through my CRO. He is really, really passionate about enablement, and I feel fortunate for that, but he actually approved every single piece of content that went into our initial 1.5 version of our onboarding program, and I made it very explicitly clear that this is just V1.5. It's not the end-all, be-all. There's more we have to do. Will on my team is here, and he's working on onboarding 2.0. Excited for that to come out, but we're setting expectations by implementing it in this way. And the good news is we've gotten really positive feedback about our onboarding program to date. We know there's more we can do, but we don't have detractors saying, okay, I don't think this meets the needs of my team or me as a leader. So definitely important to manage that change effectively. For you to help your company be successful, really consider how this will fit into your enablement strategy as a whole. I cannot, again, emphasize enough how important this piece is. I almost want to pull us back, scale back from all the conversations we've been having, all the great ideas you guys have gotten over the course of the last couple days, and think about how you're going to start implementing those. That's really important. So I don't have a fancy QR code for you guys to scan and reach out to me, but again, my name is Del Nakai. Reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. I have a few more minutes, so I'm happy to take a few questions as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Del. Okay, we've got one question right here.
You'd like to grab, there we go, grab the mic.
I am so glad you had the topic of change management. It really has transformed. We have adopted a methodology over the last probably 4 years, and it's transformed the way that we're able to execute.
Yep.
The detractor question. So
Yes.
I know there's not a silver bullet here, but
Right.
what we still witness is that some of those key detractors are, first of all, they're spread out everywhere.
Yeah.
Typically top performers from a performer perspective, and then markets or offices where those offices are very successful in different areas. And so I feel like still the challenge is we bring them in on content development, review, participation, facilitation.
Yeah.
But there's still this essence of like, I'm not owning this change, right? I'll participate, but I'm not owning. So I don't know if you have any additional perspective on trying to get them to better own the change outside of some of those participation elements.
Well, two thoughts on that. One is when it comes to coaching, the most effective coaching actually happens to the middle 60% of that person's team, right? It's important to coach high performers because they feel engaged, but it's not necessarily where we get the most bang for our buck, nor do we want to necessarily mess with a process that's working. So that's the first thing I would say is you don't necessarily want to fix something that's not broken. Now, if it's pervasive and you're trying to change a culture in addition to making that strategic change, then that's a little bit different. You do need to bring them along for the ride. The number one thing comes back down to the managers. So one thing that could potentially be helpful is, if you don't do this already, having those regular communications with managers, and sometimes I need to remind myself to do that as well. Will just reminded me the other day. Having those conversations, getting them on board, helping them understand the why. How are you going to take this to your team now? Who are you concerned about potentially pushing back against this? How can we help address this with them? So talking through really openly about what they're going to be facing and helping to guide those conversations with them can be really valuable.